In Silver Creek Junction, they whispered about the wolves that roamed the mountains, how they never crossed paths with humans unless something profound hung in the balance. Yet there stood Raven, a striking gray wolf with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom, at the edge of Michael Harrington's dying farmland. The broken farmer had already surrendered to his losses, his father's death, his wife and son's departure, the poisoned soil that had been in his family for generations. But when the wolf appeared 3 mornings in a row, standing sentinel at the forest's edge before retreating into the pines, Michael felt a pull he couldn't explain. Can you guess where this story is going? Drop a comment with your city or country. Let's see how far this story reaches. On the 4th morning, with nothing left to lose, he followed her into the wilderness, through ravines and over fallen trees, to a forgotten cabin buried in snow and secrets. Michael Harrington's weathered hands trembled as he poured his morning coffee. The kitchen window framed his view of the family farm, 50 acres that had sustained the Harringtons for 4 generations. Now, withered crops stretched toward the horizon, a sea of failure beneath the gray December sky. He raised the chipped mug to his lips, the bitter liquid matching his mood. 3 months since his father's passing. 6 weeks since Rebecca had taken Mason and left. 2 days since the bank's final notice arrived. Outside, frost clung to dead stalks where corn should have flourished. The barn, once housing healthy livestock, stood empty, save for his old dog, Bear, and a few stubborn chickens. Michael's gaze drifted toward the tree line where the Whispering Pines forest began. That's when he saw her again. The wolf stood motionless at the border between field and forest. Even from this distance, her distinctive silver-gray coat caught the weak morning light. She was large for a female, with unusual markings, a splash of white across her chest like a crescent moon. 3 mornings now, she'd appeared, watching the farmhouse with unnerving focus. Michael set down his coffee and reached for his father's old rifle propped in the corner. He'd never shot a wolf, but predators this bold could threaten what little remained of his livelihood. As he stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, the wolf didn't flee. She simply watched him, amber eyes reflecting intelligence that made his skin prickle. The animal tilted her head slightly, then turned and trotted several yards into the trees. There, she stopped, looking back at him. "Go on, get out of here," Michael shouted, his voice shattering the morning quiet. The wolf remained, her gaze steady. Bear limped to Michael's side, the aging farm dog's arthritic legs stiff in the cold. Oddly, he made no move to chase the intruder. Instead, he whined softly, looking between his master and the wolf. "What's gotten into you?" Michael muttered, lowering the rifle slightly. The wolf took a few more steps into the forest, then stopped again, looking back. Michael's neighbor, Elijah, had mentioned wolves acting strangely lately. "Animals know things we don't," the old man had said while helping Michael repair fence posts last week. "They sense when something's wrong with the land." Plenty was wrong with the land. Crops failing 3 years running. Livestock sickening without explanation. The same story all across Silver Creek Junction. Some blamed changing weather patterns. Others pointed to the new processing plant upriver. But no one had proof of anything. The wolf took another few steps and paused again. "She wants me to follow," Michael whispered to himself, the absurdity of the thought not lost on him. Bear whined again, pawing at Michael's leg. "I must be losing my mind." Michael propped the rifle against the porch rail and stepped down into the yard. The wolf's tail swished once, and she moved deeper into the trees. Michael hesitated at the field's edge. The forest had always been a boundary, the wild place beyond his orderly farm. His father had respected that boundary, taught Michael to do the same. "We're farmers, not woodsmen," Thomas Harrington had said. "Know your place." But Michael's place was crumbling beneath his feet. The bank would take everything by month's end. What did boundaries matter now? "Come on, Bear," he said, and the old dog fell in beside him as they crossed into the shadow of the pines. The wolf kept a steady distance, always visible but never close enough to touch, leading them deeper along game trails Michael had never noticed, despite living beside these woods his entire life. The morning grew colder as they moved farther from the farm, their breath forming clouds in the winter air. This is madness, Michael told himself after 20 minutes of walking, following a wild animal into the forest. Yet something compelled him forward. Perhaps desperation. Perhaps the wolf's unwavering certainty. Perhaps simply the need to do something, anything besides watching his life disintegrate. The trees grew denser, older, the forest floor covered in pine needles that muffled their footsteps. Twice, Michael almost lost sight of his guide, her gray coat blending with the winter shadows. But each time, she seemed to sense his hesitation and would wait, sometimes looking back with what he could only describe as impatience. Bear kept close, occasionally sniffing the wolf's trail but showing none of his usual territorial aggression. The old dog seemed almost reverent, as though understanding something Michael couldn't grasp. After nearly an hour, the terrain changed. The forest floor sloped downward into a small valley protected by steep ridges. The wolf picked her way down a narrow deer path, disappearing momentarily behind a stand of ancient pines. When Michael navigated the slope and rounded the trees, he found himself in a clearing he never knew existed. At its center stood a cabin. The structure was small and weathered, its log walls darkened by decades of exposure. A thin wisp of smoke curled from a crooked stone chimney, the only sign that the place wasn't completely abandoned. The wolf sat beside the cabin's door, watching Michael expectantly. "Hello?" Michael called, approaching cautiously. "Anybody there?" No response came from within. The windows were covered with what looked like old blankets from the inside, preventing any view of the interior. The wooden steps creaked beneath his weight as he climbed to the small porch. Bear stayed at the bottom, whining anxiously. Michael knocked firmly on the door. "Hello. Do you need help?" When silence again met his question, he tried the handle. The door swung inward with a groan of rusty hinges, releasing a wave of cold, stale air. The cabin's interior was dim, lit only by faint daylight filtering through the covered windows and the dying embers in a small stone fireplace. As his eyes adjusted, Michael made out simple furnishings, a table with one chair, shelves with a few supplies, a makeshift bed in the corner. On that bed lay a figure. "Oh my God," Michael whispered, rushing forward. A woman lay motionless under several threadbare blankets. Her face was pale against dark hair, her breathing shallow and labored. Beside the bed, a backpack had spilled its contents, a professional camera, notebooks, a satellite phone with a cracked screen. Michael touched her forehead. Her skin burned with fever. "Miss? Can you hear me?" He gently shook her shoulder. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Around the small cabin, pinned to the walls and scattered across the table, were photographs. As Michael glanced at them, his breath caught. Images of men in the night, dumping barrels into Silver Creek. Close-ups of strange chemical residue along the riverbank. Dead fish floating on water that gleamed with unnatural colors. One photo made him freeze. Mayor Harold Wilson himself, directing workers as they unloaded containers from unmarked trucks behind the processing plant. The plant that had brought prosperity to Silver Creek Junction 4 years ago, right when the farms began to fail. Michael recognized the woman now. Sarah Wilson. The mayor's daughter, who'd returned from the city last month. The one who'd been asking questions all over town before suddenly disappearing 2 weeks ago. The official story was that she'd gone back to the city. But rumors suggested otherwise. The wolf had entered behind him, sitting now beside the bed, her amber eyes never leaving Michael's face. "Did you bring her food?" Michael asked, noticing small animal bones in the corner. "Have you been keeping her alive?" The wolf blinked slowly. Michael returned his attention to Sarah. She needed medical help immediately. He reached for the satellite phone, but it was dead, damaged beyond use. His own phone showed no signal this deep in the valley. I have to get her back to town, he said, more to himself than the wolf, as he gathered Sarah into his arms, wrapped in the blankets. He felt how light she was, how fragile. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he stood, cradling her against his chest. The wolf rose and moved to the door, waiting. You led me here to save her, Michael said, the realization dawning like a cold sun. But why me? The photographs answered his unspoken question. If what they showed was true, it explained everything. The failing crops. The sick livestock. His father's mysterious illness that no doctor could diagnose. The water they all relied on, poisoned systematically while the town slowly died. I understand now, Michael said, his voice cracking. And they'll pay for this. I swear it. The wolf led the way out of the cabin, setting a careful pace as Michael carried Sarah back toward civilization. Bear walked beside them, occasionally looking up at the burden in his master's arms. The journey back seemed both shorter and infinitely longer, each step bringing them closer to a confrontation years in the making. As they neared the edge of the forest where Michael's fallow fields began, Sarah stirred in his arms. The pictures, she whispered, her eyes still closed. They have to see the pictures. They will, Michael promised. Everyone will. When they emerged from the trees, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the land. The farmhouse stood in the distance, a symbol of everything Michael had lost, and now, perhaps, a headquarters for the fight to reclaim it all. The wolf stopped at the forest's edge, her mission complete. Thank you, Michael said, knowing how strange it must sound to thank a wild animal. I won't forget this. The wolf held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and melted back into the shadows of the pines, leaving Michael to carry both Sarah and the burden of truth back to a town built on lies. As he walked the final stretch toward his home, Michael felt tears streaming down his weathered face, tears for his father, who had died not knowing why, tears for the land that had been deliberately poisoned, tears for the justice that would finally come. And perhaps, tears of gratitude for the mysterious wolf who had chosen him, a broken, desperate man, to bring that justice to light. Silver Creek Junction's only medical facility was a small clinic staffed by Dr. James Morgan and 2 nurses. The waiting room fell silent as Michael burst through the doors, Sarah Wilson cradled in his arms, his faithful dog Bear trailing behind. I need help, Michael demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet space. She's burning with fever. Dr. Morgan emerged from an examination room, eyes widening at the sight before him. Michael, what's... He stopped short when he recognized the unconscious woman. Sarah Wilson. She's supposed to be back in the city. She never left, Michael said, following as the doctor motioned him toward an empty room. I found her in an old cabin in Whispering Pines. She's been there for days. Michael gently laid Sarah on the examination table while Dr. Morgan called for his nurse. The doctor's professional demeanor took over as he checked her vital signs. Dehydration. Exposure. High fever, Dr. Morgan muttered. Melissa, get an 4 started. He turned to Michael. Where exactly did you find her? Michael hesitated. The doctor had been his father's friend, but in Silver Creek Junction, loyalties were complicated. About 3 miles into the forest. There's an old trapper's cabin in a small valley. Dr. Morgan's eyebrows rose. Nobody's used that place in decades. What was she doing there? Taking photographs, Michael replied carefully. Of the creek. Something flickered across the doctor's face, recognition, then concern. He leaned closer to Michael, lowering his voice. Your father had strange chemicals in his blood work. I couldn't identify them then, but I sent samples to a lab in the city. The results came back last week. Michael's heart pounded. Industrial waste compounds, Dr. Morgan said, glancing at the nurse who was focused on setting up the 4. Used in manufacturing. The kind that shouldn't be anywhere near our water supply. Before Michael could respond, the clinic doors burst open again. Sheriff Mark Dawson strode in, followed by Mayor Harold Wilson himself. The mayor's imposing figure filled the small waiting room, his expensive coat standing out among the worn furnishings. "I got a call saying my daughter's been found," Wilson announced, voice carrying the authority of a man used to commanding attention. Dr. Morgan stepped out of the examination room. "She's here, Harold. She's alive, but in poor condition." The mayor pushed past him to see Sarah, his face paling at the sight of his daughter. "What happened to her?" he demanded, turning to Michael with accusation in his eyes. "I was hoping you could tell me," Michael replied evenly, meeting the mayor's gaze. "I found her in the forest with a camera full of interesting photographs." Mayor Wilson stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What are you implying, Harrington?" Sheriff Dawson placed a hand on his holster, a subtle gesture that wasn't lost on Michael. "Let's all calm down. Michael, why don't you tell us exactly what happened?" Michael recognized the trap forming around him, two men with power, facing a farmer about to lose everything. "I was checking my property line when I found her collapsed in the woods," he lied. "She had camping gear with her. Must have been out there taking nature photos when she got sick." The lie felt bitter on his tongue, but instinct told him to keep the wolf, the cabin, and the incriminating photographs to himself, for now. Relief visibly washed over the mayor. "Always had a wild streak, my Sarah. Thankfully you found her, Harrington." Dr. Morgan cleared his throat. "She needs rest and medical attention. I recommend we transfer her to the regional hospital." "Nonsense," Mayor Wilson replied. "I'll take her home where she belongs. We have a private physician." "With all due respect," Dr. Morgan countered, "she's severely dehydrated with signs of exposure. Moving her now would be—" "I wasn't asking, doctor." The mayor's tone ended all discussion. "Prepare her for transport." Sheriff Dawson turned to Michael. "I'll need a statement about exactly where and how you found her." Michael nodded, his face betraying nothing of the rage building inside him. "Of course, Sheriff. Whatever helps." As the mayor stepped outside to make a phone call, Dr. Morgan pulled Michael aside. "Her backpack," he whispered. "Did you bring it?" "No," Michael answered truthfully. "I was focused on getting her help." "Go back for it," the doctor urged. "Soon." Within an hour, Sarah was loaded into the mayor's luxury SUV, still unconscious but stabilized. Michael watched from the clinic steps as the vehicle pulled away, followed by the sheriff's patrol car. The mayor hadn't offered thanks, merely a curt nod that somehow contained both acknowledgement and warning. "This isn't over," Michael murmured to Bear, who sat loyally at his side. The winter afternoon was fading into evening by the time Michael returned to his farm. He parked his weathered pickup truck beside the house and sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. The events of the day seemed dreamlike: the wolf, the cabin, Sarah Wilson, the photographs that could change everything. He needed to go back to the cabin, retrieve the evidence before the mayor's men could find it. But exhaustion weighed on him like a physical presence, the adrenaline of the morning long since burned away. As Michael stepped out of his truck, a familiar figure emerged from behind the barn. Elijah Cooper, stooped with age but still strong, approached with purpose in his stride. "Heard you found the Wilson girl," the old man said without preamble. "Word travels fast," Michael nodded wearily. "News like that always does," Elijah said. His weathered face creased with skepticism. "They're saying you found her hiking in the woods. That the truth of it?" Michael considered his neighbor carefully. Elijah had been his father's closest friend, a fixture in Michael's life since childhood. If anyone could be trusted, it was him. "No," Michael admitted quietly. "It's not the truth. Not even close." He led Elijah inside, where the warmth of the wood stove contrasted with the cold reality of his situation. Over cups of strong coffee, Michael recounted the morning's events, the wolf that had appeared 3 days running, its strange behavior, the journey through the forest to the hidden cabin. Elijah listened without interruption, his gnarled hands wrapped around his mug, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. When I saw those photographs, Michael concluded, everything made sense. The failing crops. The sick animals. My father's illness. They've been poisoning the creek for years, Elijah. The mayor. The processing plant. All of them. The old man nodded slowly. Your father suspected something wasn't right. That's why he kept sending water samples to that university friend of his. The last batch went out the week before he died. Michael felt as though he'd been struck. He never told me. Thomas didn't want to burden you until he had proof, Elijah sighed heavily. The results never came back. Or if they did, he was already gone. The wolf, Michael said after a moment. Have you ever seen anything like that? An animal behaving that way? Elijah's expression grew distant. My grandmother was from the old country. She believed some animals could sense injustice, that they'd seek out those who could make things right. He shrugged. Superstition, probably. But in my 78 years, I've seen enough to know there's more mystery in this world than most care to admit. Before Michael could respond, headlights swept across the front window. Both men tensed. Expecting company? Elijah asked. Michael moved to the window, peering through the faded curtains. It's Rebecca, he said, surprise evident in his voice. And Mason. His estranged wife's sedan pulled up beside his truck. The passenger door opened, and his 10-year-old son leapt out, running toward the house with childish energy that made Michael's heart ache. Why would they come now? Michael wondered aloud. Elijah rose stiffly. I'll make myself scarce. This should be private. No, Michael said. Stay. Please. The front door burst open before Elijah could reply. Mason rushed in, his small face alight with excitement. Dad! Everyone's talking about how you rescued the mayor's daughter from the woods. Are you a hero now? Did you really carry her all the way back? Rebecca followed more slowly, her expression cautious as she entered the house she'd left 6 weeks earlier. She nodded to Elijah, then turned her attention to Michael. I thought Mason should hear whatever happened from you, she explained. Not from playground rumors. Michael knelt to embrace his son, holding him tightly. Over the boy's shoulder, he met Rebecca's eyes. Thank you for bringing him. Dad, can I see Bear? Mason asked, wriggling free. Is he still sleeping in the mudroom? Go check, Michael smiled. He's missed you something fierce. As Mason dashed off, squealing with delight when he found the old dog, Rebecca moved closer. The whole town's talking, Michael. They're saying you saved Sarah Wilson's life. I found her. That's all. That's not all, Rebecca countered. You're not telling me everything. Michael glanced at Elijah, who nodded encouragingly. Sit down, Becca, Michael said. There's something you need to know. He told her about the photographs, the evidence of toxic dumping, connecting it to the farm's decline and his father's death. With each word, Rebecca's expression shifted from skepticism to horror to anger. Those bastards, she whispered when he finished. Thomas always said that plant was poison, but nobody listened. Sarah Wilson has proof, Michael replied. If she's willing to share it. If her father lets her. Rebecca pointed out, Harold Wilson didn't get where he is by being careless. Which is why I need to go back to that cabin tonight, Michael decided. Get the camera. The notebooks. Everything I can find. Rebecca's face tightened with concern. They'll be watching you now. I know a back way, Elijah interjected. Through the North Ridge. Longer route, but no one would think to look there. Rebecca studied both men, then nodded slowly. I'll stay with Mason. He can spend the night here. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He's been missing home anyway. From the mudroom came the sound of boyish laughter and a dog's excited bark, the familiar noise filling the old farmhouse with a warmth it had lacked for too long. Michael reached tentatively for Rebecca's hand. After a moment's hesitation, she allowed him to take it. "I'm sorry about your father," she said softly. "If what you're saying is true, then he didn't die for nothing. We can make this right." "We will," Michael promised, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. Night had fallen completely by the time Michael prepared to leave. He dressed in dark clothing, packed a flashlight, rope, and provisions into a knapsack, and tucked his father's hunting knife into his belt. Mason was asleep in his old bedroom, exhausted from the excitement of reunion. Rebecca stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Michael with an expression he couldn't quite read. "The mayor will protect himself at any cost," she warned. "Be careful." "I will." Michael hesitated, then added, "When I get back, maybe we could talk about us." Rebecca's eyes softened. "One crisis at a time, Michael." Elijah waited outside, an old rifle slung over his shoulder. "Ruth sent these," he said, handing Michael a pair of hand warmers. "Said you'd need them where we're going." The two men set off on foot, heading north rather than directly west toward the forest. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp as glass shards in the black sky. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air. "Your father would be proud," Elijah said after they'd walked in silence for nearly a mile. "Standing up against men like Wilson, that takes courage." Michael thought about his father's quiet determination, his unwavering belief in doing what was right regardless of cost. "I hope so." As they crested the north ridge, the lights of Silver Creek Junction spread out in the valley below. From this distance, it looked peaceful, untouched by corruption. Michael knew better now. There, Elijah pointed to a narrow deer trail winding down the ridge. "That'll take us into the eastern edge of Whispering Pines. From there, it's about 2 miles to your cabin." Michael nodded, then froze as movement caught his eye at the forest's edge. A familiar silhouette waited in the moonlight. "The wolf," he whispered. "She's back." Elijah squinted into the darkness. "I'll be damned." Raven stood perfectly still, her silver-gray coat gleaming under the stars. As they watched, she turned and slipped into the trees. "Looks like we have a guide," Elijah said, voice tinged with wonder. Together, the men descended the ridge, following the path of the wolf into the dark heart of the forest, toward a cabin that held the truth that could save their dying town. Whispering Pines forest transformed at night. What had been mysterious in daylight became almost otherworldly in darkness. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled silver across the forest floor as Michael and Elijah followed the wolf deeper into the woods. "She's keeping her distance," Michael observed, his voice hushed, "but making sure we can still follow." Elijah nodded, conserving his breath as they navigated the uneven terrain. The old man moved with surprising agility for his age, each step deliberate on the frost-hardened ground. The wolf, Raven, as Michael had come to think of her, would pause occasionally on the path ahead, her amber eyes reflecting the moonlight, before she'd turn and continue onward. Unlike the morning's journey, she now seemed to understand the need for stealth, making no sound as she guided them through the shadows. "Your father used to talk about wolves returning to these parts," Elijah said during one such pause. "Said it meant the forest was healing itself." Michael considered this. Strange to think of healing when everything else is dying. "Nature finds its balance," Elijah replied, "even when we try to destroy it." They fell silent again as they approached the valley where the cabin lay hidden. Michael raised a hand, signaling Elijah to stop. Something felt wrong. The small clearing was too quiet, missing the normal sounds of night creatures. Then he saw it, faint tire tracks in the frost-covered ground, leading toward the cabin. "Someone's been here," Michael whispered, crouching low. Elijah knelt beside him, examining the tracks. "Recent. Heavy vehicle. Probably the sheriff's department SUV." Michael's heart sank. They got here first. The wolf had stopped at the edge of the clearing, ears alert, body tense. She turned her head toward them, then looked pointedly at the rear of the cabin where shadows were deepest. "She wants us to go around back," Michael said, feeling foolish even as he spoke the words. Yet Elijah merely nodded, as though talking about a wolf's intentions was the most natural thing in the world. They circled wide through the trees, approaching the cabin from behind. No lights shone from within. No vehicles remained in the clearing. Whoever had come was already gone. The cabin's back wall featured a small window, its glass long since broken and covered with a piece of tarp that fluttered slightly in the night breeze. Michael approached cautiously, listening for any sound from inside. Nothing. "Wait here," he told Elijah, drawing his father's hunting knife. "Cover me if needed." Elijah positioned himself with a clear view of the cabin's front, the old rifle ready. "Be quick about it." Michael carefully pulled back the tarp covering the window and peered inside. The cabin appeared empty. He slipped the knife blade between the window frame and sash, lifting the crude latch that held it closed. With minimal noise, he raised the window and climbed through. The interior was darker than he remembered, and immediately he sensed the difference. The place had been searched, thoroughly. The photographs that had been pinned to the walls were gone. Sarah's equipment bags had been emptied, their contents missing. "Damn it!" Michael muttered, switching on his flashlight but keeping the beam pointed downward to minimize light visible from outside. He moved methodically through the small space, checking every corner. The searchers had been professional but hurried. They'd taken the obvious evidence but hadn't had time for a detailed search. Michael ran his hands along the underside of the rough-hewn table, feeling for anything taped or hidden beneath. Nothing. He checked the stone fireplace, probing between rocks where items might be concealed. Again, nothing. Finally, he examined the crude bed frame where Sarah had lain. The thin mattress had been tossed aside, the frame itself pulled from the wall. But something caught his eye, a slight unevenness in the floorboards beneath. Dropping to his knees, Michael ran his fingers along the wooden floor. One board moved slightly under pressure. Using the knife, he carefully pried it up, revealing a small space between the floor and the ground beneath. There, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a small waterproof case. Inside was a memory card and a small notebook, its pages filled with Sarah's neat handwriting, dates, times, names. A meticulous record of the environmental crime she'd been documenting. "Thank you," Michael breathed, pocketing the items and replacing the floorboard. A soft sound from outside froze him in place. He extinguished the flashlight, plunging the cabin into darkness as he listened intently. The distant rumble of engines. Michael moved swiftly to the window, slipping back outside to where Elijah waited. "Vehicles coming," he whispered urgently. "At least 2. Maybe more." Elijah's weathered face tightened. "Did you find anything?" Michael patted his pocket. "Memory card and notes. Hidden under the floor." "Good man. Now let's disappear." They melted into the trees just as headlights appeared at the far end of the clearing. 2 black SUVs with Silver Creek Junction Sheriff's Department markings rolled to a stop before the cabin. Sheriff Dawson emerged from the first vehicle, along with 2 deputies. From the second stepped Mayor Wilson himself, accompanied by a man Michael recognized as Victor Holden, the processing plant's manager. "I told you we should have burned the place down," Holden's voice carried in the still night air. "And start a forest fire? Draw more attention?" The mayor sounded annoyed. "We got everything important, the photographs, her camera, the samples." Sheriff Dawson emerged from the first vehicle, along with 2 deputies. From the second stepped Mayor Wilson himself, accompanied by a man Michael recognized as Victor Holden, the processing plant's manager. "I told you we should have burned the place down," Holden's voice carried in the still night air. "And start a forest fire? Draw more attention?" The mayor sounded annoyed. "We got everything important, the photographs, her camera, the samples." "Not everything," Sheriff Dawson interjected. "My men did a fast sweep." If she kept backups or notes somewhere less obvious. Then find them, Wilson snapped. Search every inch. I want nothing left that could connect us to any of this. Michael felt Elijah's hand on his arm, a silent signal to retreat deeper into the forest. They backed away slowly, careful to make no sound as the men entered the cabin, flashlight beams dancing through the windows. The wolf was waiting for them 50 yards into the trees. She led them away along a different path than they'd arrived, staying well clear of the cabin but moving with clear purpose. She's taking us away from them, Michael whispered as they followed. Smart animal, Elijah replied. They walked for nearly half an hour, the sounds of the search party fading behind them. The wolf's chosen path took them along a ridge overlooking Silver Creek itself, the waterway that gave the town its name. In the moonlight, Michael could see an unnatural sheen on the water's surface, an oily rainbow pattern that shouldn't exist in nature. Finally, they reached a point where the forest began to thin, giving way to the northern edge of Michael's property. The wolf stopped, sitting on her haunches at the boundary between woods and fields. We're clear, Elijah said, relief evident in his voice. They won't think to look for us coming from this direction. Michael approached the wolf, stopping a respectful distance away. Thank you, he said simply. The animal regarded him with those intelligent amber eyes, then rose and trotted away into the darkness of the trees. Remarkable creature, Elijah murmured. More than that, Michael replied. She knew exactly what we needed, both times. They made their way across the fallow fields toward the farmhouse, where warm light glowed from the kitchen window. As they approached, Michael could see Rebecca at the sink, her silhouette familiar and somehow comforting despite their estrangement. Inside, they found her making coffee, her face tight with worry that softened at their safe return. Did you find anything? She asked as they shed their coats. Michael produced the memory card and notebook. The sheriff's department had already been there, but they missed these. Sarah had hidden them under the floorboards. Rebecca took the notebook, flipping through its pages, names, dates, locations. She was building a case, Michael. A legal case against her own father. Which means she won't be safe at his house, Michael realized aloud. If she regains consciousness and he realizes she hid evidence, she's in danger, Elijah finished gravely. The question is, what can we do about it? We're talking about the mayor, not some common criminal. Rebecca set the notebook down, her expression resolute. We need allies. People who will stand with us when we bring this to light. Dr. Morgan, Michael suggested. He already suspects something with the chemicals he found in my father's blood. Jenny Thompson at the library, Rebecca added. Her father's farm went under last year because their livestock kept dying. And Frank Morris, the retired ranger. He's been complaining about changes in the forest ecosystem for years. We need to be careful who we trust, Elijah cautioned. Word gets around fast in Silver Creek Junction. A soft noise from the doorway drew their attention. Mason stood there in pajamas, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Dad, what's going on? He asked, his young voice piercing the tension in the room. Michael crossed to his son, kneeling to meet him at eye level. Nothing for you to worry about, buddy. Just grown-up talk. What are you doing up? I heard voices, Mason said. And I saw the wolf outside my window. The three adults exchanged startled glances. What wolf, sweetie? Rebecca asked carefully. The big gray one with the white moon shape on her chest, Mason replied matter-of-factly. She was looking at me, then she ran away when you and Mr. Cooper came inside. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. Did you see her before tonight? Mason nodded. Sometimes she comes to the window when I'm at Grandma's house in town. I told Grandma, but she said I was dreaming. Rebecca looked pale. My mother's house is 6 blocks from here. In the middle of town. Looks like your wolf has been keeping an eye on more than just you, Michael, Elijah said quietly. Michael hugged his son, mind racing with implications. Let's get you back to bed, champ. You need your rest. After tucking Mason in, Michael returned to the kitchen where Rebecca and Elijah were examining the contents of the memory card on an old laptop. Most of these match what I saw pinned to the cabin walls, Michael said, looking over their shoulders at the damning images, documentation of illegal dumping, water samples, even employees loading barrels onto trucks. There's more, Rebecca said, opening a folder labeled medical. Medical records, anonymized but with dates and symptoms. Cancer clusters. Respiratory issues. Neurological problems, all increasing since the processing plant opened. Elijah pointed to a spike in the data. That's when Thomas started getting sick. 3 months after they expanded the plant's operations. A familiar ache spread through Michael's chest. His father's mysterious illness had confounded doctors, progressive weakness, tremors, finally the heart failure that took his life. Not natural causes at all. But poison. Deliberately pumped into the water they all relied on. This stops now, Michael said, his voice hardening with resolve. Tomorrow, we start gathering allies. People who've been hurt by this. People who will stand with us. And Sarah? Rebecca asked. We can't leave her with the mayor. One problem at a time, Michael replied, though concern for the young woman gnawed at him. First, we make copies of everything. Get them somewhere safe. Then we decide our next move. Elijah rose stiffly from his chair. I should get home to Ruth. She'll be worried. And we'll need her help too. She knows everyone's business in this town, who can be trusted and who can't. Michael walked the old man to the door. Thank you, Elijah. For everything. Your father was my best friend, Elijah said simply. This is the least I can do. After Elijah departed, Michael and Rebecca sat in silence at the kitchen table, the weight of what they'd discovered pressing down on them both. I've been thinking about what drove us apart, Rebecca finally said, her voice soft in the quiet house. The farm failing. Your father's illness. You shutting down. We never knew we were fighting against something deliberate. Something evil. Michael met her gaze. Would it have made a difference? I think so, she admitted. I left because I thought you'd given up. But you hadn't. You just didn't know what you were fighting yet. Her hand found his across the table, a tentative bridge across the gulf that had opened between them. He grasped it like a lifeline. Stay, he said. Not just tonight. Help me fix this. All of it. Rebecca's eyes glistened in the low light. One step at a time, Michael. Let's save the town first. Then we'll see about saving us. In the bedroom down the hall, Mason slept peacefully, unaware of the dangers and decisions swirling around him. Outside, at the edge of the property where field met forest, a silver-gray wolf stood sentinel in the moonlight, watching over the farmhouse and the family within. Morning would bring new challenges, new dangers. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, hope flickered like a small flame in the darkness, fragile, but growing stronger with each passing moment. Dawn broke over Silver Creek Junction with steel-gray light filtering through low clouds heavy with the promise of snow. Michael stood on his front porch, coffee mug warming his hands as he surveyed the farm that had been in his family for generations. The withered fields, the empty barn, the silent tractors parked in perpetual disuse, all bore witness to the slow poisoning that had nearly destroyed everything he loved. But for the first time in years, Michael felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Purpose. Behind him, the farmhouse door opened. Rebecca stepped out, wrapped in his father's old cardigan, her breath visible in the cold morning air. Mason still sleeping? She asked, joining him at the porch railing. He was so excited to be home. I doubt he'll wake before noon. Home. The word hung between them, neither acknowledging its weight. I made copies of everything, she continued, handing him a small envelope, memory card duplicated, photos printed, notebook pages scanned. One set is hidden here, one in my car, and I encrypted digital copies to my email. Michael nodded appreciatively. Rebecca had always been the organized one, the planner to his impulsive action. We need to check on Sarah. I can't shake the feeling she's in danger at the mayor's house. Agreed. But we can't just walk up to the Wilson estate and demand to see her, Rebecca reasoned. We need a legitimate reason. Michael considered this. Dr. Morgan. He treated her initially. He could claim medical follow-up. Good thinking. I'll call him. Rebecca paused, her expression softening. It's strange, isn't it? Yesterday morning we were separated, barely speaking. Now we're plotting against the most powerful man in town. Strange, Michael agreed. But it feels right. Like we found our footing again. A distant howl from the forest edge drew their attention. The wolf, Raven, was visible for just a moment before disappearing into the trees. Still keeping watch, Michael observed. She saved 3 lives already, Rebecca said quietly. Sarah's. Yours. And this farm's. Michael's phone rang, breaking the moment. It was Elijah, his voice urgent without preamble. Turn on your radio. SKJN News. Michael hurried inside, flipping on the old kitchen radio. Rebecca followed, concern etched on her face as the local station came through. And in tragic accident news last night, Sarah Wilson, daughter of Mayor Harold Wilson, passed away from complications due to exposure and hypothermia. Found yesterday in Whispering Pines Forest by local farmer Michael Harrington, Ms. Wilson never regained consciousness. Mayor Wilson has released a statement thanking the community for their support during this difficult time and requesting privacy for the family. The mug slipped from Michael's hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. Coffee spread like blood across the worn linoleum. That's impossible, he whispered. She was stable when they took her. Dehydrated and weak, but stable. Rebecca's face had gone pale. They're covering their tracks, Michael. Making sure she can't testify about what she found. Did they kill her? The words felt surreal even as he spoke them. Or they're lying about her death, Rebecca suggested, her mind working quickly. Either way, we need confirmation. Michael was already grabbing his coat. I'm going to the clinic. Dr. Morgan will know the truth. I'm coming with you, Rebecca insisted, already reaching for her keys. Mason will be fine for an hour. He sleeps like a rock. The drive to town passed in tense silence. Silver Creek Junction's main street was quieter than usual, flags at half-mast outside the town hall. A small memorial of flowers had already appeared at the base of the town square gazebo, where Sarah had often taken photographs for the local newspaper before leaving for college. The medical clinic's parking lot was nearly empty when they arrived. Inside, the receptionist looked up in surprise. We need to see Dr. Morgan, Michael said. It's urgent. He's with a patient. It's about Sarah Wilson, Rebecca interjected, lowering her voice. Please. The woman hesitated, then nodded, disappearing into the back. Moments later, Dr. Morgan emerged, his face drawn with fatigue. He gestured for them to follow him into his office, closing the door firmly behind them. I was going to call you, he said, rubbing his temples. This wasn't supposed to happen. Is she really dead? Michael asked bluntly. Dr. Morgan looked between them, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he sighed. No. At least, she wasn't when they took her from here yesterday. But I haven't been allowed to see her since. Relief washed over Michael, quickly replaced by renewed concern. Then they're lying. Why? Control the narrative, Rebecca suggested. If everyone believes she's dead, no one will look for her. Or her evidence. Or they're planning to make the lie true, Michael said grimly. Dr. Morgan looked ill. I've known Harold Wilson for 30 years. He's always been ruthless in business, but this. I can't believe he'd harm his own daughter. Millions of dollars are at stake, Rebecca pointed out. The processing plant. The land developments downstream. His political future. If what Sarah documented gets out, it all collapses. The doctor removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. There's more you should know. After you left yesterday, I received the full toxicology report from the lab in the city. The compounds in Thomas's blood weren't just industrial waste. They're experimental processing chemicals, highly toxic, engineered to break down quickly so they're harder to detect in standard water tests. Michael felt ice form around his heart. They knew exactly what they were doing. Yes, Dr. Morgan confirmed. And they knew the risks. There's a reason that plant was rejected by 3 other communities before Wilson offered them tax incentives to build here. A knock at the door interrupted them. The receptionist poked her head in, her expression apologetic. Sheriff Dawson is here to see you, Doctor. Says it's about the Wilson girl's death certificate. Tell him I'll be right out, Dr. Morgan replied, waiting until the door closed again before speaking. Listen carefully. Sarah is being kept at the Wilson estate. I heard the mayor's wife telling someone they've brought in a private nurse to ease her passing. We have to get her out, Michael said immediately. It won't be easy. The estate is gated, with security cameras and the sheriff's department making regular patrols. The doctor opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small key. This is for the service entrance on the north side of the property. Margaret Wilson gave it to me years ago when I was treating her migraines. It might still work. Rebecca took the key, slipping it into her pocket. We'll need help. I can create a distraction, Dr. Morgan offered. Request an emergency consultation at the main house. That would draw attention away from the service area. When? Michael pressed. Tonight. After dark. I'll call around 8 with a concern about medication interactions. Dr. Morgan stood. I need to go handle the sheriff before he gets suspicious. Be careful, both of you. This goes deeper than you know. They parted with nods of understanding, slipping out through a side exit to avoid crossing paths with Sheriff Dawson. Back in Rebecca's car, they sat, processing what they'd learned. We need more allies, Rebecca said finally. People we can trust completely. Michael nodded. Elijah and Ruth. Jenny Thompson from the library, her father's farm was ruined too. And Frank Morris, the retired ranger. He knows every inch of these woods if we need to move quickly or hide. I'll contact Jenny and Frank. You talk to Elijah and Ruth, Rebecca decided. We'll meet back at the farm by noon to plan. The pieces were falling into place, but a nagging concern lingered in Michael's mind. What about Mason? We can't involve him in this. Rebecca's expression softened. My sister in Boulder has been asking him to visit. I could drive him there today, make sure he's safely away from whatever happens next. Relief and sadness mingled in Michael's chest. Seeing his son again only to send him away felt like another loss. But keeping him safe mattered most. It's the right call, he agreed quietly. As they drove back toward the farm, Michael watched the familiar landscape of Silver Creek Junction roll past, the snow-dusted fields, the tired Main Street businesses, the processing plant smokestacks visible in the distance. All of it threaded together by the Silver Creek that had once been the lifeblood of the community, and now carried poison to every farm and home. We're really doing this, he said, half to himself. Taking on the mayor. The plant. All of it. Rebecca's hands tightened on the steering wheel. They killed your father, Michael. They're killing our home. Someone has to stop them. When they reached the farmhouse, Mason was awake and making himself a haphazard breakfast of cereal and apple slices. His face lit up when they entered, a brightness that made Michael's heart ache. Dad! Can we check on the chickens? Are there still eggs? Michael ruffled his son's hair, treasuring the moment. Sure, buddy. Let's do that right now. They spent a precious hour together, gathering eggs from the remaining hens, Michael showing Mason how to check for freshness by placing them in water. The boys soaked up his father's attention like parched earth in rain, chattering about school and friends and the book he was reading. Rebecca watched them from the porch steps, her expression a mixture of tenderness and resolve. When they returned, cheeks ruddy from the cold, she knelt before Mason. "How would you like to visit Aunt Kelly in Boulder for a little while?" she asked carefully. "She's got that new puppy you've been wanting to meet." Mason's eyes widened. "Really? Can Dad come too?" The question hung painfully in the air. Michael crouched beside Rebecca. "Not this time, champ. I've got important work to do here on the farm. But maybe soon." Mason's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but the prospect of a puppy proved sufficiently distracting as he ran inside to pack his favorite toys. Rebecca and Michael exchanged a look of shared understanding. They were protecting him the only way they knew how. Elijah and Ruth arrived as Mason was finishing his packing. The elderly couple brought fresh bread and news. Jenny Thompson and Frank Morris had agreed to help and would meet them that afternoon. "The town's buzzing about Sarah's death," Ruth reported, her voice low to keep from Mason's ears. "Some believe it. Some don't. But everyone's noticed the increased sheriff patrols and Mayor Wilson's security detail. They're scared," Elijah added. "Which makes them dangerous." Michael nodded grimly. "Tonight, we get Sarah out. Then we take everything we found to the state authorities." "And if the state authorities are in Wilson's pocket too?" Ruth asked, ever practical. "Then we go to the press," Rebecca answered. "Every outlet within 500 miles. Make it too big to bury." As they discussed strategies, Michael noticed Mason at the window, staring intently into the field beyond. He joined his son, following his gaze to the forest edge where a familiar figure stood watching. "The wolf came back," Mason said excitedly. "Can I go see her?" Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "Wolves are wild animals, Mason. We have to respect their space." "But she's special, isn't she?" the boy pressed. "She helped you find that lady in the woods." Michael stared at his son in surprise. "How did you know that?" Mason shrugged. "I heard you and Mom talking. And I dreamed about it too. The wolf leading you through the trees to help someone." A chill ran down Michael's spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. Before he could respond, Rebecca called from the doorway. "Mason, honey, it's time to go if we want to reach Aunt Kelly's before dark." The goodbye was quick but emotional. Michael held his son tightly, inhaling the scent of his hair, memorizing the feeling of those small arms around his neck. "Be good for your aunt and Mom, okay? I'll see you soon." Mason asked, suddenly serious. "Promise," Michael replied, meaning it more than anything he'd ever said. As Rebecca's car disappeared down the driveway, Michael turned to find Elijah watching him with understanding in his weathered face. "He'll be safer away from here," the old man said. "You did right by him." Michael nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Instead, he looked toward the forest edge where the wolf had stood. She was gone now, but he felt her presence nonetheless, a guardian shadow moving unseen through the trees, watching, waiting for night to fall. The pieces were in motion now. By morning, everything would change for Silver Creek Junction. One way or another. By late afternoon, Michael's kitchen had become an unlikely war room. Jenny Thompson, the town librarian with wire-rimmed glasses and a spine as straight as the books she tended, spread maps across the table. Her father's farm had been the second to fail after the processing plant opened, the livestock dying mysteriously before the crops withered. Next to her stood Frank Morris, Silver Creek Junction's former head ranger, now retired but still possessing intimate knowledge of every trail and hollow in the surrounding wilderness. "The Wilson estate sits on 20 acres at the north end of town," Jenny explained, tracing the property line with her finger. "Main house is here, guest house here, and the service entrance is on this side," partially hidden by these evergreens. Frank leaned over the map, his weathered face deeply lined from decades outdoors. If you're going in that way, you'll want to park here. He indicated a spot along a rural access road, and approach on foot through this stretch of trees. It's about a quarter-mile walk, but it'll keep you off the main roads where the sheriff's deputies are patrolling. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. What about inside the house? Anyone know the layout? Ruth, who had once worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families in the area, spoke up. The mayor renovated 5 years ago. Added a guest wing on the east side. That's likely where they're keeping Sarah, private, separated from the main house but still secure and well monitored. Jenny added grimly, my cousin installed their security system. Cameras at every entrance. Motion sensors on the grounds. Michael absorbed this information, anxiety building. Dr. Morgan said he'd create a distraction at the main house around 8, but that only buys us a short window. We'll need to disable the security system, Frank said. Otherwise, we'll be on camera the moment we approach the service entrance. The group fell silent, the magnitude of what they were planning sinking in. Breaking into the mayor's home to rescue his daughter, it sounded impossible, even with justice on their side. A soft knock at the back door startled everyone. Michael moved cautiously to answer it, relief washing over him when he saw Dr. Morgan standing there, looking nervously over his shoulder. I shouldn't be here, the doctor said, stepping quickly inside. But there's been a development. They're moving Sarah tonight. Moving her where? Michael demanded. A private facility in Idaho. Mayor Wilson told the hospital board he's sending her remains for special treatment before burial. But I overheard him on the phone, she's alive but heavily sedated. They're keeping her that way until she's far from Silver Creek Junction. Jenny exchanged alarmed glances with the others. When are they moving her? 9 o'clock. Private ambulance service from the city with a security escort. Dr. Morgan removed his glasses, cleaning them anxiously. If you're going to get her out, it has to be before then. The timeline had accelerated dangerously. Michael checked his watch, barely 4 hours to prepare. We need to adapt our plan, he said firmly. Instead of trying to break into the estate, we intercept the transport. Frank nodded immediately, seeing the advantage. Easier to approach a moving vehicle than breach a secured compound. The route from the Wilson estate to the highway passes through Whispering Pines, Jenny observed, tracing the road on the map. There's a stretch here, just past Cedar Bridge, where the road narrows between steep embankments. Only one lane each way. Poor visibility around the curves. Perfect place for an ambush, Elijah murmured. Michael studied the spot. We'll need to block the road somehow. Force them to stop. I've got logging chain in my truck, Frank offered. Heavy enough to stop a vehicle if we stretch it across the road. And I have road flares, Ruth added. From that winter emergency kit Thomas insisted everyone should have. The plan took shape rapidly. Frank and Elijah would set up the roadblock. Michael and Jenny would approach the stopped vehicle to retrieve Sarah, while Ruth and Dr. Morgan waited nearby with a vehicle ready to transport Sarah to safety. Simple in theory. Terrifying in execution. What about after? Jenny asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Once we have Sarah. What then? The state police will be after us within hours. We'll take her to my sister's cabin on the North Ridge, Frank said. It's isolated, off-grid, and unknown to most locals. She can recover there while we get the evidence to the right authorities. Dr. Morgan looked troubled. If Sarah's been heavily sedated, she'll need medical care. I can provide supplies, but someone will need to monitor her constantly. I'll do it, Ruth volunteered. I was a nurse before I retired. Those skills don't fade. Michael felt a surge of gratitude for these people, neighbors and friends who were risking everything to help right a terrible wrong. Thank you, he said simply. All of you. As they finalized details, Michael stepped onto the porch for a moment alone. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his barren fields, the air sharp with approaching snow. His thoughts drifted to Rebecca and Mason, hoping they'd reached Boulder safely. Then to his father. Thomas Harrington had died never knowing the truth about his illness. But perhaps now, he would have justice. A movement at the forest edge caught his eye. The wolf, Raven, stood watching, her silver-gray coat gleaming in the fading light. "We're going to finish what you started," Michael said softly, knowing she couldn't understand his words but somehow feeling she understood his intent. The wolf's ears pricked forward, her amber eyes meeting his across the distance. For a heartbeat, they regarded each other, man and wild creature, bound by an inexplicable connection. Then she turned, disappearing into the trees. Frank joined Michael on the porch, following his gaze to the now empty tree line. "Your wolf friend again?" She was there just for a moment. Michael confirmed. Watching the older man nodded thoughtfully. "My grandfather used to say that wolves don't just hunt, they witness. That they remember the sins committed against the land long after humans have forgotten." "You believe that?" Michael asked. Frank shrugged. "I believe there's more wisdom in nature than we give credit for. Maybe your wolf knows something we don't." He clapped Michael on the shoulder. "Come on. It's time to gear up." Dusk settled over Silver Creek Junction as they prepared to depart. Michael changed into dark clothing, tucking the memory card and copies of Sarah's notes securely in an inner pocket. He strapped his father's hunting knife to his belt and packed a small bag with first aid supplies, water, and energy bars. Jenny approached as he finished, her usual librarian's cardigan replaced by a practical dark jacket. "Rebecca called," she said. "They made it to Boulder safely. She wanted you to know." Relief flooded through Michael. At least his son and estranged wife were far from the danger they were about to face. "Did you tell her what we're doing tonight?" he asked. Jenny shook her head. "Just that we were gathering evidence. She doesn't need to worry about details she can't control from there." By 7:30, they were in position. Frank's pickup was parked on a logging access road half a mile from Cedar Bridge, hidden among the trees. Michael, Frank, and Elijah made their way on foot to the ambush point, carrying chains, flares, and tools. The night was bitter cold, their breath forming clouds in the beam of their flashlights. "Weather's turning," Frank observed, glancing at the sky where clouds had blotted out the stars. "Snow coming. Might work in our favor. Harder for them to spot us, and it'll cover our tracks afterward." The narrow stretch of road beyond Cedar Bridge was exactly as Jenny had described, a winding passage hemmed in by steep embankments with poor visibility around several sharp curves. They selected a spot just beyond the sharpest bend, where vehicles would be forced to slow regardless. Working quickly, they secured heavy logging chains to trees on either side of the road, positioning them at bumper height. Elijah scattered caltrops, makeshift tire spikes fashioned from nails welded together, across the road surface, while Frank set up road flares to be lit when they received Dr. Morgan's signal that the transport was approaching. "Remember," Michael cautioned as they finished, "our goal is Sarah's safety. No unnecessary risks. No confrontation unless absolutely unavoidable." The men took their positions, Frank and Elijah concealed in the trees flanking the road, Michael hidden behind a large boulder at the curve. Jenny waited 50 yards back with Ruth and the getaway vehicle, an old Jeep Cherokee capable of handling off-road terrain if needed. Waiting was agony. Each passing minute stretched Michael's nerves tighter, the cold seeping into his bones as the first snowflakes began to fall. His thoughts kept returning to the wolf, to Raven, wondering if she was somewhere in these same woods, watching and waiting as they were. At 8:40, Michael's phone vibrated, a text from Dr. Morgan. "Transport leaving now. 1 ambulance. 1 SUV escort. 4 men total." Adrenaline surged through his system. He signaled to Frank, who acknowledged with a raised hand, ready to light the flares at the first sound of approaching vehicles. The minutes crawled by. In the distance, an owl called, its haunting cry echoing through the trees. The snowfall intensified, flakes swirling in the beam of the flashlight Michael kept carefully shielded. Then, headlights in the distance. The low rumble of engines approaching the bridge. Frank struck the flares, the sudden red glare harsh against the snowy darkness. He hurled them onto the road just beyond the chain barricade, creating an urgent warning any driver would instinctively slow for. The vehicles appeared around the bend, first a black SUV with the Silver Creek Junction Sheriff's Department insignia, followed by a white ambulance. The SUV's brakes squealed as the driver spotted the flares and barricade, coming to a halt just short of the chains. The ambulance stopped behind it. "Now," Michael whispered, pulling a ski mask over his face. Everything happened at once. Frank and Elijah emerged from the trees, pointing hunting rifles at the SUV. The sheriff's deputy behind the wheel raised his hands instantly, clearly unprepared for an ambush. The passenger, another deputy, reached for his sidearm but thought better of it when Frank chambered a round with an ominous click. Michael sprinted to the ambulance, yanking open the driver's door before the startled man inside could react. "Out. Hands where I can see them." The driver, not a medical professional but a burly man in a security uniform, complied reluctantly. Behind him, a second guard emerged from the passenger side, hands raised. "On the ground. Face down," Michael ordered, gesturing with the hunting knife. When they hesitated, he added, "Now. We only want the girl." The guards exchanged glances, then slowly knelt in the accumulating snow. Michael nodded to Elijah, who kept his rifle trained on them while Michael moved to the ambulance's rear doors. Inside, Sarah Wilson lay strapped to a gurney, an .4 in her arm and monitoring equipment beeping softly beside her. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, clearly heavily sedated as Dr. Morgan had warned. "I've got her," Michael called, climbing inside. He quickly assessed the medical setup, carefully removing the .4 as Ruth had instructed him. Sarah didn't stir as he unbuckled the restraints and gathered her into his arms. Frank had ordered the deputies from the SUV, forcing them to lie face down beside the security guards. 2 minutes, he warned Michael. "Then we're out." Michael carried Sarah from the ambulance, her body limp and disturbingly light in his arms. He hurried up the embankment where Jenny waited to help. Together, they carried her through the trees to Ruth's waiting jeep. "How is she?" Ruth asked immediately, checking Sarah's pulse as they settled her in the back seat. "Stable but completely out," Michael replied. "They've got her on some heavy sedatives." A sharp whistle signaled that Frank and Elijah were retreating. Moments later, they emerged from the trees, moving quickly toward the vehicle. "Drive," Frank urged as they piled in. "They'll be free in minutes." Ruth hit the accelerator, the jeep's tires spinning briefly in the snow before finding purchase. They bumped along the logging road, headlights off to avoid detection, relying on Frank's intimate knowledge of the forest to guide them. "Did anyone see your faces?" Jenny asked anxiously. "Negative," Elijah replied. "Mask stayed on. But they'll know it was locals. No outsider could have planned this ambush point." Michael kept one arm protectively around Sarah as the jeep jolted over the rough terrain. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breathing steady but worryingly slow. "How long until the sedatives wear off?" he asked Ruth. "Hard to say without knowing exactly what they gave her," the older woman answered, eyes fixed on the barely visible track ahead. "Could be hours. Could be longer. We'll monitor her carefully." They drove in tense silence for nearly 20 minutes, following increasingly obscure forest roads until they reached a narrow trail that barely qualified as a path. "My sister's cabin is just ahead," Frank said. "No electricity, but there's a generator, wood stove, and it's well stocked with supplies. She only uses it in summer." The cabin appeared through the falling snow, a small, sturdy structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. Unlike the abandoned cabin where Michael had found Sarah, this one was well maintained, with storm shutters and a metal roof designed to shed snow. Working together, they carried Sarah inside and settled her on a bed in the cabin's single bedroom. Ruth immediately began a more thorough examination while Dr. Morgan, who had arrived separately, unpacked medical supplies. "Will she be all right?" Michael asked, hovering anxiously in the doorway. Dr. Morgan nodded. "Her vitals are steady. The sedatives will wear off naturally. The important thing is that she's safely away from her father and those who would silence her." In the main room, Jenny was already setting up a laptop, preparing to examine the evidence from Sarah's memory card. Elijah and Frank secured the cabin, checking windows and doors, drawing heavy curtains across each to prevent any light from being visible outside. Michael sank into a chair by the wood stove, the events of the night catching up with him in a wave of exhaustion. His hands trembled slightly as reaction set in. What they'd done, intercepting an ambulance, essentially kidnapping the mayor's daughter, was illegal by any measure. If they were caught before Sarah could tell her story and the evidence could reach the proper authorities, they would all face serious charges. Yet watching his friends move purposefully around the cabin, each committed to seeing this through, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced since before his father's death. Hope. Real, substantial hope that justice might actually be possible. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, cloaking the forest in pristine white. Somewhere in that winter landscape, Michael knew, a silver-gray wolf moved among the trees, a silent guardian whose intervention had set everything in motion. "We did it," he whispered to himself. "The hard part's over now." But as Ruth emerged from the bedroom with concern etched on her face, Michael realized their challenges were only beginning. "We have a problem," she announced. "Sarah's not just sedated. I think she's been drugged with something specifically designed to keep her unconscious long-term. Something that won't wear off on its own." Dr. Morgan joined them, his expression grave. "I recognize the symptoms. It's a compound called pentobarbital. It's used to induce medical comas in trauma patients." A chill ran through the room that had nothing to do with the winter night outside. "How do we reverse it?" Michael demanded. The doctor removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes wearily. "We need the antagonist drug. Without it, she could remain unconscious for days, possibly suffering permanent brain damage." "And let me guess," Jenny said quietly. "The only place in Silver Creek Junction that would have this antagonist is the hospital pharmacy." Dr. Morgan confirmed. "Which will be locked down tight, especially now that they know Sarah's been taken." Michael stared into the flames flickering in the wood stove. The victory of their rescue suddenly hollow. They had Sarah, but couldn't wake her. Had the evidence, but no witness to authenticate it. "Then we go get it," he said finally, looking up at the concerned faces around him. "Tonight. Before they have time to increase security." Elijah shook his head. "It's too dangerous, Michael. The entire sheriff's department will be looking for us." "We have no choice," Michael insisted. "Sarah is the key to everything. Without her testimony, the evidence alone might not be enough. People could claim the photos were doctored, the samples contaminated." A heavy silence fell over the group as they confronted this new obstacle. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the cabin windows with a sound like distant whispers. Then, barely audible above the wind, came another sound, a wolf's howl, long and clear, echoing through the forest around them. Frank moved to the window, cautiously peering through a gap in the curtains. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. "Your wolf is out there, Michael." Standing in the clearing, looking right at the cabin. Michael joined him, his heart rate quickening as he spotted the familiar silver-gray figure amid the swirling snow. Raven sat perfectly still, amber eyes reflecting the faint light from the cabin, seeming to stare directly at him through the window. "She found us," Michael whispered. "Even in this storm, miles from my farm, she found us." As they watched, the wolf rose and took several deliberate steps toward the eastern forest edge, then stopped and looked back at the cabin. Frank's eyebrows rose. If I didn't know better, I'd say she wants you to follow her again. That's exactly what she wants, Michael replied, already reaching for his coat. And I'm going to do it. Michael, no. Jenny protested. It's freezing out there. The snow's getting worse by the minute. But Michael was already pulling on his boots. Every time that wolf has led me somewhere, it's been exactly where I needed to go. I trust her more than I trust most people right now. Elijah sighed heavily but reached for his own coat. I'm going with you. No arguments. Me too, Frank added. No one knows these woods better than I do, especially in a snowstorm. Ruth and Jenny exchanged looks of resigned frustration. Men, Ruth muttered. Always rushing headlong into danger. We'll stay with Sarah, Jenny told Michael. Dr. Morgan too. But you have 1 hour before we come looking for you, storm or no storm. Michael nodded gratefully, checking that his father's hunting knife was secure at his belt. 1 hour should be enough. Either Raven has something to show us, or I'm finally losing my mind completely. 50-50 odds, Elijah deadpanned, earning a reluctant smile from Michael. The three men stepped out into the swirling snow, closing the cabin door firmly behind them. The wolf watched them from the tree lean, her form ghostly in the winter night. Lead on, Michael called to her. We're following. As if understanding his words, Raven turned and trotted into the forest, pausing just often enough to ensure they kept her in sight. Once again, Michael found himself following a wolf into the unknown, driven by faith in an animal that had already changed his life once. Whatever lay ahead in the snowy darkness, he was certain of one thing: their journey was far from over. Snow swirled around Michael, Elijah, and Frank as they followed the wolf deeper into the forest. The storm had intensified, visibility reduced to mere yards, but Raven seemed untroubled by the weather. She moved with purpose, pausing occasionally to ensure they kept pace, her silver-gray coat appearing and disappearing amid the whirling white. We're heading northeast, Frank observed, his experienced woodsman's sense of direction intact despite the blinding conditions. Toward the old mining road, if I'm not mistaken. Elijah trudged alongside Michael, his breath labored but determined. You sure your wolf knows where she's going? Because I'm not keen on freezing to death out here. She knows, Michael replied, though doubt gnawed at him. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the wind cutting through their layers of clothing. If they stayed out much longer without shelter, hypothermia would become a real threat. Just as Michael was about to suggest turning back, the trees thinned. They emerged into a small clearing dominated by a dilapidated structure, an old ranger station, long abandoned by the forestry service. Well, I'll be, Frank murmured. Station 6. Haven't been here in 15 years at least. The wolf trotted to the station's door, then sat beside it, watching them expectantly. Is this what you wanted to show us? Michael asked, approaching cautiously. The building was small but solidly built, its windows boarded up, a heavy padlock securing the door. Frank examined it closely, recognition dawning on his weathered face. This was my supply cache, he explained. When I was head ranger, we kept emergency medical supplies at all the outposts. Standard procedure in remote areas. Michael's pulse quickened. Including medications? Frank nodded slowly. Basic stuff, but also some advanced supplies for serious emergencies. When they downsized the ranger service, these stations were supposed to be cleared out. He shrugged. Paperwork gets lost. Inventory mistakes happen. Elijah gestured to the padlock. Can you open it? Better than that, Frank replied, reaching into his pocket for a ring of keys. I never turned this one in when I retired. Figured it might come in handy someday. The key turned with difficulty, the lock's mechanism stiff from years of disuse and exposure to the elements. Inside, the station was dusty but remarkably intact, a small desk, filing cabinets, a two-way radio system long dead, and a metal cabinet marked with a faded red cross. There, Frank said, moving toward the medical cabinet. Let's see what survived. The cabinet yielded a treasure trove of supplies, bandages, antiseptic, splints, and several boxes of medications, their labels yellowed but legible. Frank sorted through them with experienced hands, setting aside anything expired or damaged. These are still good, he said after careful examination, holding up several vials. Basic sedative reversals. Emergency stimulants. Antibiotics. Not hospital grade, but forestry medics are trained for serious trauma. These outposts were stocked accordingly. Frank frowned, reading the fine print on each vial. This might, he said finally, holding up a small bottle. Flumazenol. It's used to reverse benzodiazepine overdoses. If the sedative they used on Sarah has similar properties to benzos, this could help bring her around. And if it doesn't? Elijah asked cautiously. Then it probably won't hurt her either, Frank replied. Most of these reversal agents are pretty specific. If they don't target the right receptors, they simply don't work. Michael stared at the small vial, their unexpected lifeline. The wolf knew, he murmured. Somehow, she knew this was here. This was, Elijah glanced nervously toward the door where Raven still sat watching. That's a mighty big coincidence if she didn't. Frank tucked the medication and various supplies into his pack. Let's not question our good fortune. We need to get back before this storm gets any worse. They secured the station and stepped back into the howling wind. The wolf rose immediately, but instead of leading them back the way they had come, she trotted to the northern edge of the clearing. That's not the way to the cabin, Frank called, pointing in the opposite direction. We need to go south. The wolf stopped, looking back insistently, then continued north. Michael hesitated, torn between following their four-legged guide and the logical path back to shelter. She hasn't steered us wrong yet. This isn't the time to test that theory, Elijah argued. We have what we came for, and this storm is turning into a blizzard. As if to punctuate his point, a powerful gust drove snow horizontally across the clearing, momentarily obscuring their vision. When it cleared, the wolf had returned, pacing anxiously at the edge of the trees. I think she's trying to tell us something, Michael insisted. The direct route might not be safe. Frank studied the sky, his experienced eyes reading the weather. Storm's getting worse by the minute. If we get caught in the open. He didn't need to finish the thought. 5 minutes, Michael compromised. We follow her for 5 minutes. If she's not leading us somewhere clearly helpful, we turn back and take the direct route. Grudgingly, the others agreed. They plunged back into the forest, following Raven's ghostly form as she led them along a winding path through the densest sections of pines, where the canopy provided some shelter from the driving snow. After several minutes of difficult travel, Frank suddenly raised his hand for silence. Listen, he whispered. Through the howl of the wind came another sound, engines. Vehicles moving slowly along what must be a nearby road. Down, Frank hissed, dropping to a crouch. The three men crept forward until they could see through a screen of evergreens to a Forest Service road below. 2 Sheriff's Department SUVs and a larger vehicle, possibly a snow plow, were making their way slowly through the accumulating snow. They're searching the forest, Elijah whispered. Looking for the cabin. If we'd gone back the direct way, Michael began. We'd have walked right into them, Frank finished grimly. Your wolf just saved us again. They watched as the vehicles continued past, then Frank gestured for them to follow him along a route parallel to but well away from the road. We'll circle wide to the east, then approach the cabin from behind the ridge. It'll take longer, but we'll avoid any patrols. The wolf seemed to approve of this plan, falling into step alongside them as they navigated the forest with agonizing slowness. The temperature continued to drop, the storm's fury unabated. Michael lost track of time as they pushed through snow drifts and waded across a half-frozen stream, each step requiring concentrated effort. Finally, after what felt like hours, the cabin came into view. No vehicles were visible, no tracks marred the pristine snow around it. Their detour had worked. As they approached the back door, the wolf stopped at the forest's edge. Michael turned to her, an unspoken question in his eyes. Raven watched them for a long moment, then silently retreated into the trees, her mission complete. "Thank you," Michael called after her, earning confused glances from his companions. Inside, Ruth practically dragged them through the door, scolding them for staying out so long while simultaneously helping them shed their frozen outerwear. The cabin's warmth was almost painful against their numbed skin. "We were about to come looking for you fools," Jenny admonished. "What happened?" Frank produced the vial of flumazenol triumphantly. "We found medication that might help Sarah. And avoided a sheriff's department search party in the process." Dr. Morgan examined the medication, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "This could actually work. It's not the specific antagonist for pentobarbital, but it operates on similar pathways." "Where on earth did you find it?" "Old Ranger Station," Frank explained. "Medical cache that was never cleared out." Jenny looked at Michael curiously. "And the wolf led you straight there? How would she know about medical supplies?" Michael had no answer, and thankfully, no one pressed for one. They were too focused on Sarah, who remained unnaturally still in the cabin's small bedroom. Dr. Morgan carefully measured a dose of the flumazenol, his movements precise despite his obvious fatigue. "This isn't a guaranteed solution," he cautioned, "but it's our best option right now." Ruth helped position Sarah while the doctor administered the medication intravenously. Then they waited. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the wood stove and the howl of wind outside. 10 minutes passed. 15. Sarah showed no signs of waking. "It might take time," Dr. Morgan said, but doubt had crept into his voice. "Her system has been heavily suppressed." Michael paced the small confines of the cabin, anxiety building. If the medication didn't work, they would need to risk a raid on the hospital pharmacy after all, a near-suicide mission now that the entire county was undoubtedly searching for them. Another 5 minutes dragged by. Elijah had just suggested they start planning their next move when Ruth called sharply from the bedroom. Her fingers moved. "I saw them twitch." They crowded into the doorway as Sarah's eyelids fluttered, her breathing changing, becoming less mechanical and more natural. Slowly, her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then gradually clearing as awareness returned. "Where?" she managed, her voice barely audible. "You're safe," Michael told her, kneeling beside the bed. "We got you away from your father." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "The farmer," she whispered. "From the cabin." Michael nodded. "Michael Harrington. You've been unconscious for days. Your father announced that you had died, but we knew better." Sarah struggled to process this information, her drug-clouded mind working to catch up. "My camera. The evidence." "We have it," Jenny assured her, stepping forward. "The memory card. Your notebook. Everything. It's safe." Relief washed over Sarah's pale features. "They were poisoning the creek," she said, her voice strengthening slightly. "For years. The processing plant, disposal was too expensive, so they dumped at night. My father knew. He helped cover it up." "We know," Michael said gently. "That's why they were keeping you sedated. So you couldn't testify." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features that had nothing to do with her physical condition. "My own father. When I confronted him with what I'd found, he said it was necessary sacrifice for the town's economic growth." Her voice broke. "People died. Your father died." Michael felt an old wound reopen at her words, the grief he'd never fully processed, now mingled with anger. Thomas Harrington. He suspected something was wrong with the water. He was sending samples for testing. He was right, Sarah confirmed. The chemicals they dumped are linked to heart failure among other conditions. Industrial solvents. Heavy metals. Experimental processing compounds. All documented in my research. Dr. Morgan checked Sarah's vital signs as she spoke, his expression gradually relaxing as he confirmed her improvement. The medication is working. Your mind is clear. Clearer by the minute, she replied, though I feel like I've been hit by a truck. That's the sedatives wearing off, he explained. You'll feel weak for a while, but your system will recover. Frank joined them, his weathered face serious. Sarah, we don't have much time. The sheriff's department is searching the forest as we speak. We need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it, someone beyond your father's influence. Sarah's expression hardened with resolve. I have contacts at the EPA regional office and an editor at the Western Environmental Journal who's been following my investigation. They're expecting my report. Can you reach them? Michael asked. My satellite phone, Sarah began, then stopped. It was damaged in the cabin. We'll find another way, Michael assured her. The important thing is that you're awake and can authenticate the evidence. Jenny leaned against the door frame, laptop in hand. I've been reviewing the files while you were out. There's enough here to shut down the plant permanently and send several people to prison, including Mayor Wilson. Sarah nodded weakly. That was the plan. Before my father found out. A sudden gust rattled the cabin windows, drawing their attention to the worsening storm outside. Frank moved to check the weather through a gap in the curtains. Blizzard setting in for real now, he reported grimly. We won't be going anywhere until it passes. Roads will be impassable by morning. Which might work in our favor, Elijah pointed out. Can't search effectively in a blizzard. Michael considered their situation, trapped in a remote cabin with the most wanted witness in Silver Creek Junction, a snowstorm their only protection against discovery. They had the evidence and now Sarah's testimony, but no way to get it to the authorities who could act on it. We need a plan for when the storm breaks, he said finally. A way to get Sarah and the evidence out of the county without being intercepted. I might have an idea, Frank offered. But it depends on how long the blizzard lasts and how quickly Sarah regains her strength. As they began discussing options, Michael's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, surprised to see a signal, just one bar flickering unsteadily. The message was from Rebecca. Sheriff's deputies came asking questions at my sister's. We're safe but they're casting a wide net. Be careful. Love to all of you. The love caught him off guard, a small warmth in the midst of danger. He texted back quickly before the signal could disappear. Sarah awake. Evidence secure. Snowbound for now. Tell Mason his dad is okay. Outside, the blizzard wrapped the cabin in a cocoon of white, isolating them from the world but also from those who sought to silence them. Inside, by the light of kerosene lamps and the warmth of the wood stove, a small group of unlikely allies prepared for the battle to come, a battle for truth, for justice, and for the future of Silver Creek Junction. And somewhere in the howling storm, a wolf moved silently through the darkness, her watchful presence felt even when unseen. Dawn broke over a transformed landscape. The blizzard had dumped nearly 2 feet of snow overnight, rendering the forest around the cabin a pristine white wilderness. Inside, Michael stood at the window, watching the sun's first rays catch on crystallized branches. The storm had passed, but its aftermath provided a temporary reprieve. No vehicles could navigate these woods until the roads were cleared. Sarah sat wrapped in blankets by the wood stove, her strength gradually returning after a night of fitful sleep. The sedatives had left her system, but weakness lingered in her limbs, her movements careful and measured. They'll start searching again as soon as they can get vehicles through, Frank observed, joining Michael at the window. We have maybe 6 hours before the county plows reach the Forest Service roads. Michael nodded grimly. Then we need to be gone before that happens. Their plan had taken shape during the long night hours. Frank's sister owned a small plane, a bushcraft kept at a private airstrip on the far side of the mountain. If they could reach it, Sarah could be flown directly to the city, outside Mayor Wilson's influence, where federal authorities could take her statement and secure the evidence. "How's our patient?" Michael asked, turning to where Dr. Morgan was checking Sarah's vital signs. "Improving steadily," the doctor replied. "Still weak, but alert and oriented. She can travel if we're careful." Sarah looked up, determination evident in her pale face. "I can manage. I've spent too long trying to expose this to fail now." Jenny had spent the early morning hours organizing Sarah's evidence, photographs, water samples, medical data, and personal testimony, into a compelling case file. "It's all here," she confirmed. "Irrefutable proof of deliberate contamination and its consequences. Including your father's death," Sarah told Michael softly. "The chemical signature in his medical records matches exactly what they were dumping upstream from your farm." The confirmation should have brought satisfaction, but Michael only felt a hollow ache. Justice for Thomas Harrington wouldn't bring him back. Ruth bustled in from the small kitchen area, carrying mugs of hot coffee. "You'll all need your strength. It's 10 miles to the airstrip, much of it uphill." Elijah studied a topographical map spread across the table. "If we follow Cedar Creek, then cut across Blacktail Ridge, we can avoid the main roads entirely. It's rough country, but passable, especially with good tracking." Frank added meaningfully, glancing at Michael. Everyone understood the unspoken question: would the wolf appear again to guide them? As if summoned by their thoughts, a familiar howl echoed through the morning stillness. Michael moved quickly to the window. There, at the forest edge, Raven sat in the snow, her silver-gray coat gleaming in the early light. "She's back," he said simply. No one questioned it anymore, this strange bond between man and wild creature. They had all seen too much to doubt that the wolf was somehow invested in their journey. They prepared to depart with practiced efficiency, packing only essentials, ensuring the evidence was secure in waterproof containers, dividing provisions so no single person carried everything. Sarah insisted on carrying her own backpack despite her weakness, refusing special treatment. "I started this," she said firmly. "I'll see it through." Just before they left the cabin, Dr. Morgan took Michael aside. "I can't come with you," he said quietly. "I need to return to town. When questions start flying about Sarah's body and missing medication, someone needs to be there to control the narrative." Michael clasped the older man's shoulder. "That's a big risk, document." "Your father was my friend," Dr. Morgan replied simply. "And this town deserves better than what Harold Wilson has done to it." They parted with handshakes and promises to meet again when justice had been served. The doctor would take a roundabout path back to Silver Creek Junction, arriving as if he'd been caught in the storm while checking on a remote patient. The remaining 6, Michael, Sarah, Jenny, Frank, Elijah, and Ruth, set out across the snow-laden forest. Raven led the way, keeping a steady pace that Sarah could manage, choosing paths where the snow was less deep or where fallen logs provided natural bridges across streams. "She's deliberately finding the easiest route," Jenny observed with quiet amazement as they followed the wolf along a gentle gradient instead of the steeper direct path. "She knows Sarah is struggling," Michael replied, helping the young woman over a fallen tree. "She's adapting." Sarah studied the wolf with a photographer's eye. "I've documented wolf behavior for conservation journals. This isn't normal. They avoid humans, especially groups." "Nothing about Raven is normal," Elijah said. "Not since the day she appeared at Michael's farm." They traveled in silence after that, conserving energy for the difficult journey ahead. The forest was eerily quiet, the snow dampening all sound except their labored breathing and the crunch of their boots breaking through the crust. Occasionally, they heard distant engines, plows working on the main roads, gradually clearing paths that would eventually allow the search to resume. By midday, they had covered nearly 5 miles, following Cedar Creek's winding course through a valley thick with pines. Sarah was tiring visibly, her face drawn with exhaustion despite her determination. During a brief rest, Michael noticed her grimacing as she massaged her legs. "Muscle pain?" he asked, offering her his water bottle. "Side effect of the sedatives?" She explained, taking a grateful sip. "My whole body feels like it's been through a meat grinder." Ruth examined her with professional concern. "We need to pace ourselves. Pushing too hard could cause collapse." "We don't have a choice," Sarah insisted. "Every hour increases the chance they'll cut us off before we reach the airstrip." As if to emphasize her point, the distant rumble of engines grew momentarily louder, then faded again. The snow plows were making progress. The wolf, who had been waiting patiently nearby, suddenly stood alert, ears pricked toward the sound. Without warning, she trotted back to Michael, circling him once before heading up a steep embankment to their right, away from the creek they'd been following. "She wants us to change course," Michael said, recognizing the behavior pattern. Frank consulted his map with a frown. "That's not the way to the airstrip. It's deeper into the wilderness." "But away from the roads they're clearing," Elijah pointed out. "She might be leading us around patrols." They faced a critical decision: trust their planned route or follow the wolf into unknown territory. Michael looked at Sarah, whose exhaustion was evident despite her stoic expression. "We follow Raven," he decided. "She hasn't led us wrong yet." The new path took them up a challenging incline, forcing them to help Sarah over the steepest sections. At the ridgetop, the reason for the detour became clear. Below, in the valley they would have entered had they continued along Cedar Creek, two sheriff's department snowmobiles patrolled back and forth, their riders scanning the forest with binoculars. "They're cutting off the direct routes," Frank whispered, pulling everyone back from the ridgeline. "Smart strategy," Michael replied, nodding toward Raven, who was already moving along the ridge in a direction parallel to their original route. The detour added miles to their journey, but the alternative was capture. They pressed on, helping Sarah over increasingly difficult terrain. By late afternoon, her strength was fading dangerously. Twice she stumbled, and the third time, she would have fallen if Michael hadn't caught her arm. "I need a minute," she admitted finally, sinking onto a fallen log. Ruth knelt beside her, checking her pulse with concern. "Her heart rate's too high. We need to rest, really rest, not just a 5-minute break." "We can't stop now," Jenny protested, glancing at the lowering sun. "It'll be dark soon, and the temperature's dropping again." "If we push her too hard, she'll collapse," Ruth countered firmly. "And then what?" The dilemma hung heavily in the cold air. Darkness in these temperatures without shelter could be deadly, but Sarah clearly couldn't continue at their current pace. Frank studied the terrain ahead, eyes narrowed in concentration. "There's an old hunting cabin about a mile northeast of here. It's not much, but it has walls and a wood stove. Can you find it?" Michael asked. The old ranger nodded. "I think so. Haven't been there in years, but some landmarks don't change." The wolf, who had been waiting several yards ahead, suddenly returned to them. She approached Sarah directly for the first time, sniffing the air around her before turning to trot in exactly the direction Frank had indicated. "Well, that answers that question," Elijah said dryly. With Michael and Elijah supporting Sarah between them, they followed Raven through the gathering dusk. The temperature plummeted as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, their breath-forming clouds in the fading light. Just when it seemed they might have to stop regardless of shelter, the small hunting cabin appeared among the trees. It was little more than a shack, a one-room structure with a metal chimney pipe protruding from its slanted roof, but it offered protection from the elements, and at this point, that was all that mattered. The door creaked open to reveal a space long abandoned but still intact, a crude bunk along one wall, a small wood stove in the corner, a rough-hewn table, and various hunting implements hanging from pegs. Frank immediately set about checking the stove and chimney for blockages while Ruth helped Sarah to the bunk. "Just for a few hours," Sarah insisted weakly. "Until I can catch my second wind." Michael knew better, she needed real rest, overnight at minimum, but he didn't argue. Instead, he joined Elijah and Jenny in gathering firewood from the stack behind the cabin, relieved to find it relatively dry beneath its protective tarp. Soon, a small fire crackled in the wood stove, spreading blessed warmth through the cabin. Ruth had coaxed Sarah into drinking a broth made from their provisions while Frank calculated distances on his map by the light of a battery-powered lantern. "If we leave at first light, we can still make the airstrip by noon," he determined. "My sister will have the plane ready as promised." "Assuming the sheriff hasn't put roadblocks on all the exit routes by then," Jenny cautioned. "The mountain pass is too narrow for effective roadblocks," Frank replied. "One vehicle could be bypassed on foot if necessary." As they discussed options, Michael stepped outside to check their surroundings. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars sharp as glass shards against the black sky. The wolf sat at the edge of the small clearing, her eyes reflecting the faint light from the cabin window. "Thank you," Michael said softly, approaching her. "For everything." Raven watched him with those intelligent amber eyes, neither retreating nor advancing as he drew near. For the first time, Michael wondered about her story, where she had come from, why she had chosen to involve herself in human affairs. Wolves typically avoided people at all costs, yet this one had deliberately sought him out, had guided him repeatedly, had seemingly dedicated herself to their cause. "I wish I understood," he told her. "Why us? Why this fight?" In the silence that followed, he almost expected an answer. Instead, the wolf simply rose and paced a circle around him before returning to her watchful position. Michael rejoined the others inside, finding them gathered around the small table where Sarah, looking marginally better after food and rest, was examining Frank's map. "There's something we haven't considered," she said as Michael entered. "What happens after I reach the city? The evidence will trigger an investigation, but investigations take time. Meanwhile, the plant continues operating, the dumping continues, and the people who tried to silence me remain in power." "What are you suggesting?" Jenny asked. Sarah's expression hardened. "That we stop them now. Not just document the crimes, but end them." "How?" Elijah asked skeptically. "We're fugitives in the woods, not an environmental SWAT team." "But we have something they don't know we have," Sarah countered. "Precise knowledge of when and where they dump the chemicals. It's all in my notes, schedules, locations, personnel." Michael began to understand. "You want to catch them in the act. With witnesses and cameras." Sarah confirmed. "Irrefutable, real-time evidence that not even my father could explain away." The group exchanged uncertain glances. What Sarah proposed would further delay getting her safely out of the county and significantly increase their risk of capture. "The next scheduled dump is tomorrow night," she continued. "They use the old logging access point behind the plant, where the creek bends around that granite outcropping. It's isolated. Minimal chance of accidental witnesses. It's also the opposite direction from the airstrip," Frank pointed out. "We'd be backtracking toward danger." "Split up," Michael suggested suddenly. "Sarah continues to the airstrip with Frank and Ruth. The rest of us double back to document the dumping." Immediate protests erupted from everyone, Sarah refusing to leave while others took risks for her cause, Jenny concerned about dividing their already small group, Elijah worried about Michael's growing personal investment in the confrontation. "It makes tactical sense," Michael insisted. "Sarah's testimony and the existing evidence need to reach authorities regardless of what else happens. That's non-negotiable. But if we can add irrefutable proof of ongoing criminal activity caught in the act, it strengthens the case immeasurably." The debate continued well into the night, positions shifting as fatigue and the gravity of their situation wore on them all. By the time they reached a decision, the fire had burned low, casting the cabin in shadowy dimness. Sarah would indeed continue to the airstrip with Frank, whose knowledge of the terrain and connection to the pilot were essential, and Ruth, her nursing skills potentially crucial for Sarah's continued recovery. But instead of Michael, Jenny, and Elijah all returning to document the dumping, they would split further. Jenny would join the airstrip group, bringing a copy of all evidence in case the others were captured, while Michael and Elijah would handle the surveillance operation. Two men can move faster and stay hidden better than a larger group, Michael reasoned, though his true motivation was protecting as many of his friends as possible. As they finally settled into their makeshift beds, Sarah on the bunk, the others on blankets spread across the floor, Michael found sleep elusive. Tomorrow, they would separate, each group facing its own dangers. The complexity of what they had uncovered, the far-reaching consequences of Silver Creek Junction's poisoning, weighed heavily on his mind. Outside, a wolf's howl pierced the silence, a long, haunting call that spoke of wilderness and freedom and things beyond human understanding. The sound reassured Michael in ways he couldn't articulate. They weren't alone in this fight. They never had been. Morning would bring new challenges, but also the promise of justice, for his father, for the community, for the land itself. With that thought, Michael finally drifted into dreamless sleep, the wolf's call echoing in his consciousness like a promise. The first light of dawn found Michael standing at the edge of Silver Creek, watching the water ripple over smooth stones. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful night in the mountains, since Sarah's testimony and their damning evidence had reached federal authorities. The processing plant stood silent now, its gates chained, its smokestacks cold. Mayor Wilson and several plant executives were in custody, facing charges that would likely see them spend the rest of their lives in prison. The creek, once poisoned, was already showing signs of recovery. Michael knelt, dipping his fingers into the icy water. Clean. Or at least, getting there. A rustle in the undergrowth drew his attention. He turned, expecting to see Bear, the old farm dog who had become his constant shadow since Rebecca and Mason's return. Instead, amber eyes met his from the tree line. Raven. The wolf stood motionless, her silver-gray coat gleaming in the morning light. For a long moment, they regarded each other, man and wild creature bound by something neither could name. Then, with a flick of her tail, Raven turned and disappeared into the forest. Michael smiled, watching her go. Somewhere in the distance, Mason's laughter carried on the crisp morning air, mingling with Rebecca's voice calling them both to breakfast. The farm wasn't healed yet. The land would take years to recover fully. But for the first time in a long time, Michael Harrington felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. And perhaps, just perhaps, a little bit of magic. The end.